So you wanted to know what happens right at the very end when a business, hits insolvency. Well, for this deep dive, we're zeroing in on the final stage, business liquidation, in a Spanish concurso mercantil.
Okay.
We're lucky to have some incredibly detailed insights here, all thanks to MCHM Abogados. They're a Hispanic law firm, by the way, and they really specialize in this area, so, they really know their stuff.
Yeah.
We're going to break down how exactly those assets get sold off, and then how creditors get paid. What's the process? What order are things done?
Right.
It's a structured process, but it can seem, a little mysterious.
Yeah, for sure.
Our mission, then, is to really try to make this whole thing crystal clear.
Right.
And really show why understanding this even matters,
Yeah.
especially if you're involved in business yourself, or if you're just plain curious about how these things actually work. Okay, let's unpack this.
Absolutely. And what really strikes me is how this information just lays out this process. And it's a process with a lot of real-world impact, right?
Yeah.
Because when a business reaches this point, it's often after facing some pretty serious hurdles, and then the way that this liquidation unfolds affects everyone.
Yeah, that's true.
Everyone from the people who work there to those who lent money or, even supplied goods.
That's a good point. So the source material we have actually starts off by explaining how a company even arrives at this liquidation phase in the first place.
Right.
It's not actually the first thing that happens when insolvency hits, is it?
No, it isn't. The information here indicates that liquidation is much more likely to happen when a company going through a concurso mercantil hasn't been able to reach what's called a convenio, an agreement with its creditors, or, and this is interesting, or if a company did reach an agreement but couldn't actually keep to the terms of it.
Right, yeah.
So in a way, you could say this is the stage that comes after other attempts to save the business just haven't worked.
Right. And it sounds like there are a few ways that this final phase can even begin.
Yeah.
The company itself can request it, the creditors can push for it, even the insolvency administrators can recommend it, or the court can just order it, to say, that's it, we're going to liquidation. That seems important, right? Mm-hmm. It shows how different parties, they all can recognize when it's time for this ultimate step.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's really interesting when you think about it. The debtor, the creditors, insolvency administration, the court, they all have the potential to sort of trigger this phase. And it really just goes to show you how serious the situation has become.
Right.
It's like a collective, acknowledgement that the business, at least as it stands, is no longer viable.
Right.
And then once that decision's made, control of the company changes really quickly.
Yeah, that's right. And the material really emphasizes that immediate suspension of the company's own management.
Right.
It's almost like the previous leadership is asked to step aside, and the insolvency administration comes in and takes complete control. The regular administrators are out. Their authority to manage and sell assets is gone. That's a big turning point.
Huge turning point. And, if we think about the bigger picture, this suspension of power is so important for making sure the liquidation is fair and organized.
Yeah.
It prevents the old management from potentially making decisions that could hurt the creditors even more, or just make the whole process more complex.
Right.
Then the insolvency administration, because they're acting as a neutral party and under court supervision, of course, they're responsible for getting the best possible return for those who are owed money.
So with this shift in control, the text brings up this, really, it's kind of a fundamental thing, the dissolution of the company.
Yeah.
It's not just like they're temporarily stopping, they're stopping operations. It's the beginning of the end of its legal existence.
Oh, it really is. Dissolution is a legal consequence that just comes with entering this liquidation.
Right.
And the company, essentially, it stops operating as a going concern, and the whole focus shifts to settling its affairs.
Right.
Now, it's worth pointing out that the company doesn't completely lose its legal personality right when liquidation starts. It's more like the final step, the very last point of the whole process.
Okay. So the insolvency administration is in charge. And the main job, is to liquidate the assets.
Right.
The source mentions that they have to create this, detailed plan for the court.
Yeah.
What kind of things would that plan, that liquidation plan, typically cover?
It's basically their strategy, a really detailed one, for how they're going to turn those assets into actual cash.
Okay.
So it will list every single asset the company owns, give an estimated value for each one, and then suggest ways to actually sell them.
Okay.
And that could be anything: physical property, machinery, intellectual property, even existing contracts. The main goal of the plan is to be transparent and to get those assets sold for the best possible price.
Right.
So there's enough money to pay the creditors as much as possible anyway.
Okay. And the information we have, it outlines a few key ways that these assets are actually sold off. Public auctions seem to be the most common, where creditors and just other interested parties can bid.
Yeah, public auctions are definitely a common approach. It's a very open way to see how much interest there is in the market, and ideally you can get a better price through that competitive bidding process.
Right.
But the source does mention direct sales offers.
Okay. Yeah.
And that might be a better fit for certain types of assets. Or if you have a specific buyer who's already, expressed interest, that way you can negotiate directly.
Right. What's interesting to me is this third option, selling the entire company.
Yeah.
Both assets and liabilities, all in one go.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like a way to avoid a full-blown liquidation, or at least see the business continue under new ownership.
Yeah, absolutely.
This can be you see this, right? Because it's a potentially higher return, valuing the business as, an ongoing thing. But also, it minimizes disruption to the market. You might even save some jobs. And that has broader economic benefits, right?
For sure. That's a really good point.
Your sources probably touch on that, right?
Definitely. And you're right. While it is technically still a form of liquidation, for that original company, selling it as a going concern can be a much better outcome in some situations.
Right.
It preserves jobs, as you said. It can maintain those existing relationships. And it has the potential to offer a better return to the creditors than just selling off individual assets one by one.
Right.
Of course, finding a buyer who's willing to take on those debts is key.
Right. That makes sense. Now, there's this really important rule mentioned. The insolvency administrators, they're not actually allowed to buy the assets themselves.
No, they can't.
Directly or indirectly. It just feels like that's a crucial safeguard to make sure everything is fair and prevent conflicts of interest.
Absolutely. That's a core principle of insolvency law, really designed to protect the whole process from abuse.
Yeah.
It ensures that those administrators are acting in the best interest of everyone, all stakeholders involved.
Yeah. Okay. So the assets are sold off. Then comes the big question. Who gets paid first?
Right.
Because the source lays out a very specific order for paying creditors, and it's definitely not everyone just lining up at once.
No, not at all. It's very hierarchical.
Right.
It's designed to prioritize certain claims based on, their nature and their legal standing.
Okay.
So right at the top are what they call credits against the estate.
Right.
You can think of these as the costs to keep the lights on during the liquidation.
Okay.
Administrators' fees, court costs, that sort of thing. They're paid first because, they're essential for the process to even happen.
Then we move on to what they call credits with special privilege.
Right.
Which makes sense. These are debts that are secured by a specific asset.
Right, like a mortgage on a building.
Yeah, exactly.
So the money from selling that building would go towards paying off that debt first.
Right.
That special privilege gives them a direct claim on those proceeds, so their risk is much lower compared to unsecured debts.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
Then we have credits with general privilege, and this is an interesting category.
Yeah, it is.
It includes employee salaries,
right,
tax debts, Social Security obligations. So it's really interesting because it shows that society is saying, okay, these types of claims, these are important. Let's make sure these are handled first.
Definitely. It's like we as a society are saying these claims are important. We want to make sure those workers get what they're owed and that the government's claims are addressed before you get to just general debts.
Right, exactly. Then you have the ordinary credits. These are general debts.
Yeah. Right.
No special security, no special privileges. So this is where a lot of trade creditors, unsecured lenders would typically fall.
Yeah.
Now imagine you're a small supplier, right? Knowing that you're probably going to end up as an ordinary creditor, what steps could you take? What strategic steps are there to mitigate that risk when you're first starting out with a business?
That's a great question. While the sources don't give specific strategic advice, I think understanding this whole hierarchy really emphasizes how important it is to do your due diligence, to assess credit risk carefully. Maybe you can negotiate for some kind of security or at least factor that risk into your pricing and business decisions.
Right.
It's about being aware of where you stand, if that customer runs into trouble.
Okay. And then at the very bottom, you have subordinated credits.
Right. The bottom of the pile.
Interest, fines, debts to related parties, like if the company's owners had loaned it money, that sort of thing.
Exactly. So this whole structure, this hierarchy, really dictates who gets paid what, and it's entirely possible that the ones lower down, they might not get everything they're owed. They might not get anything, depending on how much money is raised from those assets.
Right. Yeah. And that's a big takeaway. The reality is there's rarely enough to go around.
Yeah.
This order of priority, it determines who takes the biggest hit. It really emphasizes how important it is to understand where your claim stands, what the security is, what the priority is.
Absolutely.
Now, the insolvency administrator, they're not just operating in a vacuum here.
Right.
The source says they have to provide regular progress reports to the judge.
Yes, to keep things transparent and accountable, both to the court and to the creditors.
Right.
These reports would detail everything that's been done, the sale of assets, how they were marketed, the bids, the final prices.
Okay.
And they'd also include the status of payments to all the creditors at each level so everyone can see how the money is being distributed.
Okay, that makes sense. And the source material wraps up by describing the end of the liquidation phase.
Right.
And it's pretty final. Once all the assets are sold, the money's distributed according to that hierarchy.
That's it.
That's it. The company's dissolved, loses its legal personality.
It's the final chapter. The company ceases to exist. The concurso mercantile is over.
Right.
That brings a formal end to the insolvency proceedings.
Oh.
Although the financial impact, for the creditors and the former owners, that can obviously linger.
Right. So, big picture, what are the key things we need to understand about this process?
Well, first off, it's structured.
Okay.
Liquidation within a concurso mercantile, it's defined by the law.
Right.
It's not this, free fall. It's a process with very specific rules and priorities.
Right.
Secondly, the insolvency administrator is crucial. They ensure the process is efficient and transparent.
Okay.
And finally, and this is really important, it tries to balance these two goals, satisfying debts and minimizing negative impacts on everyone involved.
Right. It's trying to balance those. It also makes you think about how, the source suggests that a well-managed liquidation can actually play a role in the wider economy.
Yeah, absolutely.
It provides this framework for resolving insolvency, in an orderly way. It allows creditors to recover at least some of what they're owed, and it might even free up assets or resources for, restructuring or even new ventures.
That's a really important point. Business failure, it's never what anyone wants.
Right.
But a clear and efficient process can make the economy more resilient, more dynamic.
Right.
It allows capital to be reallocated, and maybe new opportunities can emerge from what was once a distressed situation.
This has been a really insightful deep dive, I think, into what can be a really complex but really crucial aspect of the business world.
For sure.
Understanding this final stage, it really brings that whole life cycle of a business into perspective.
It does. And what I find fascinating is how the legal framework really tries to balance the interests of so many stakeholders in what is, let's face it, often a really difficult situation for everyone.
Yeah, it is. Considering how intricate this whole process is, what does this tell us about the risks involved in running a business and, and the importance of planning? Really solid financial planning.
Absolutely.
I mean, understanding this potential final stage, it really emphasizes the need for careful management, a really realistic assessment of how the company is doing financially all throughout its life, right?
Absolutely. That's a question that anyone in business at any level should be thinking about. Liquidation, while hopefully it never happens, it's a powerful reminder of why those financial practices matter so much. And it's a reminder of the potential consequences when they aren't there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for walking us through this process. And to you, the listener, thank you for your curiosity and for bringing these topics to our attention. We hope this deep dive into business liquidation has given you a better understanding of this critical part of the business world.
Yes, I hope so.
It's often unseen, but it is crucial.
Yeah.